life in the West diminished, trade routes were disrupted, 350, and the rich retreated to the more limited self-sufficiency of their country estates. As an urban lifestyle came to be associated with decadence, the church formally discouraged gluttony, 351, and hunting and pastoralism were seen as simple, virtuous ways of life. 350, recreation and spectacles. Wall painting depicting a sports riot at the amphitheater of Pompeii which led to the banning of gladiator combat in the town, 352, when Juvenal complained that the Roman people had exchanged the political liberty for bread and circuses. He was referring to the state-provided grain dole and the circenses, events held in the entertainment venue called a circus in Latin. The largest such venue in Rome was the Circus Maximus, the setting of horse races, chariot races, the equestrian Troy game, staged beast hunts, venations, athletic contests, gladiator combat, and historical reenactments. From earliest times, several religious festivals had featured games, ludi, primarily horse and chariot races, ludus circenses. 353, although their entertainment value tended to overshadow ritual significance, the races remained part of archaic religious observances that pertained to agriculture, initiation, and the cycle of birth and death. Under Augustus, public entertainments were presented on 77 days of the year. By the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the number of days had expanded to 135. 355. Circus games were preceded by an elaborate parade, Pompa Circensis. They tended at the venue. 356. Competitive events were held also in smaller venues such as the amphitheater, which became the characteristic Roman spectacle venue, and stadium. Greek-style athletics included foot races, boxing, wrestling, and the pancration. 357, aquatic displays, such as the Moxie battle, Normachia, and a form of water ballet, were presented in engineered pools. 358, state-supported theatrical events, ludus synozi, took place on temple steps or in grand stone theaters, or in the small enclosed theater called an Odeon. 359. A victor in his four-horse chariot circuses were the largest structure regularly built in the Roman world. 360, though the Greeks had their own architectural traditions for the similarly purposed hippodrome. The Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum, became the regular arena for blood sports in Rome after it opened in 80 AD. 361. The circus races continued to be held more frequently. 362. The Circus Maximus could seat around 150,000 spectators, and the Colosseum about 50,000 with standing room for about 10,000 more. 363. Many Roman amphitheaters, circuses and theaters built in cities outside Italy are visible as ruins today. 361. The local ruling elite were responsible for sponsoring spectacles and arena events, which both enhanced their status and drained their resources. 173. The physical arrangement of the amphitheater represented the order of Roman society, the emperor presiding in his opulent box, senators and equestrians watching from the advantageous seats reserved for them, women seated at a remove from the action, slaves given the worst places, and everybody else packed in between. 364. The crowd could call for an outcome by booing or cheering, but the emperor had the final say. Spectacles could quickly become sites of social and political protest, and emperors sometimes had to deploy force to put down crowd unrest, most notoriously at the Nika riots in the year 532, when troops under Justinian slaughtered thousands. 365. The Zlatan mosaic, from a dining room in present-day Libya, depicts a series of arena scenes, from top musicians playing a Roman tuba, a water pipe organ and 2 horns, 6 pairs of gladiators with 2 referees, 4 beast fighters, and 3 convicts. Condemned to Thebaists. 366. The chariot teams were known by the colors they wore, with the blues and greens the most popular. Fan loyalty was fierce and at times erupted into sports riots. 367. Racing was perilous, but charioteers were among the most celebrated and well-compensated athletes. 368. One star of the sport was Diocles from Lusitania, present-day Portugal, who raced chariots for 24 years and had career earnings of 35 million sesterces. 369. Horses had their fans too, and were commemorated in art and inscriptions, sometimes by name. 370. The design of Roman circuses was developed to assure that no team had an unfair advantage and to minimize collisions. Naufragia. 371, which were nonetheless frequent and spectacularly satisfying to the crowd. 372. The races retained a magical aura through their early association with chthonic rituals. Circus images were considered protective or lucky. Cursed tablets shave been found buried at the site of racetracks, and charioteers were often suspected of sorcery. 373. Chariot racing continued in Toth Byzantine period under imperial sponsorship, but the decline of it is in the 6th and 7th centuries led to its eventual demise. 360. The Romans thought gladiator contests had originated with funeral games and sacrifices in which select captive warriors were forced to fight to expiate the deaths of noble Romans. Some of the earliest styles of gladiator fighting had ethnic designations such as Thracian or Gallic. 374. The staged combats were considered munera, services, offerings, benefactions, initially distinct from festival games, alludi. 375. Throughout his 40-year reign, Augustus presented 8 gladiator shows in which a total of 10,000 men fought, as well as 26 staged beast hunts that resulted in the deaths of 3,500 animals. 376. To mark the opening of the Colosseum, the Emperor Titus presented 100 days of arena events, with 3,000 gladiators competing on a single day. 377. Roman fascination with gladiators is indicated by how widely they are depicted on mosaics, wall paintings, lamps, and in graffiti. 378. Gladiators were trained combatants who might be slaves, convicts, or free volunteers. 379. Death was not a necessary or even desirable outcome in matches between these highly skilled fighters, whose training represented a costly and time-consuming investment. 380. By contrast, Noxii were convicts sentenced to Thyranna with little or no training, often unarmed, and with no expectation of survival. Physical suffering and humiliation were considered appropriate retributive justice for the crimes they had committed. 173. These executions were sometimes staged or ritualized as reenactments of myths, and amphitheaters were equipped with elaborate stage machinery to create special effects. 173. 381. Tertullian considered deaths in Thyranna to be nothing more than a dressed-up form of human sacrifice. 382. Modern scholars have found the pleasure Romans took in the theatre of life and death, 383, to be one of the more difficult aspects of their civilization to understand and explain. 384. The younger Pliny rationalized gladiator spectacles as good for the people, a way to inspire them to face honorable wounds and despise death, by exhibiting love of glory and desire for victory even in the bodies of slaves and criminals. 385. Some Romans such as Seneca were critical of the brutal spectacles, but found virtue in the courage and dignity of the defeated fighter rather than in victory. 386. An attitude that finds its fullest expression with Christians martyred in the arena. Even martyr literature, however, offers detailed, indeed luxuriant descriptions of bodily suffering. 387, and became a popular genre at times indistinguishable from fiction. 388. Personal training and play. Boys and girls playing ball games. 2nd century leaf from the Louvre, in the plural, allude almost always refers to the large-scale spectator games. The singular ludus, play, game, sport training had a wide range of meanings such as wordplay, theatrical performance, board game, primary school, and even gladiator training school, as in Ludus Magnus, the largest such training camp at Rome. 389. Activities for children and young people included hoopling and knucklebones, astragale or jacks. The sarcophagi of children often show them playing games. Girls had dolls, typically 15-16 centimeters tall with jointed limbs, made of materials such as wood, terracotta, and especially bone and ivory. 390. Ball games include trigon, which required dexterity, and pastum, a rougher sport. 391. Pets appear often on children's memorials and in literature, including birds, dogs, cats, goats, sheep, rabbits and geese. 392. So-called bikini girls mosaic from Villa del Casale, Roman Sicily. 40th century. After adolescence, most physical training for males was of a military nature. The Campus Martius originally was an exercise field where young men developed the skills of horsemanship and warfare. Hunting was also considered an appropriate pastime. According to Plutarch, conservative Romans disapproved of Greek-style athletics that promoted a fine body for its own sake and condemned Nero's efforts to encourage gymnastic games in the Greek manner. 393. Some women trained as gymnasts and dancers, and a rare few as female gladiators. The famous Bikini Girls mosaic shows young women engaging in apparatus routines that might be compared to rhythmic gymnastics. X. 395. Women, in general, were encouraged to maintain their health through activities such as playing ball, swimming, walking, reading aloud, as a breathing exercise, riding in vehicles, and travel. 396. People of all ages played board games pitting two players against each other, including La Trunculi, Raiders, a game of strategy in which opponents coordinated the movements and capture of multiplayer game pieces, and 12 scripta, 12 marks, involving dice and arranging pieces on a grid of letters or rewards. 398. A game referred to as alia, dice, or tabula, the board, to which the Emperor Claudius was. Stone game board from Aphrodisias. Boards could also be made of wood with deluxe versions in costly materials such as ivory. Game pieces or counters were bone, glass or polished stone, and might be colored or have markings or images. 397. Notoriously addicted, may have been similar to backgammon, using a dice cup. Pyagus. 397. Playing with dice as a form of gambling was disapproved of, but was a popular pastime during the December festival of the Saturnalia with its carnival, norms overturned. Atmosphere. Clothing. In a status-conscious society like that of the Romans, clothing and personal adornment gave immediate visual clues about the etiquette of interacting with the wearer. 399. Wearing the correct clothing was supposed to reflect a society in good order. 400. The toga was distinctive national garment of the Roman male citizen, but it was heavy and impractical, worn mainly for conducting political business and religious rites, and for going to court. 401, 402. The clothing Romans wore ordinarily was dark or colorful, and the most common male attire seen daily throughout the provinces would have been tunics, cloaks, and in some regions trousers. 403. The study of how Romans dressed in daily life is complicated by a lack of direct evidence, since portraiture may show the subject in clothing with symbolic value, and surviving textiles from the period are rare. 402, 404. Togate statue in the Museo Archeologico Nazionale de Brazo. The imperial toga was a vast expanse of semicircular white wool that could not be put on and draped correctly without assistance. 401. In his work on oratory, Quintilian describes in detail how the public speaker to orchestrate his gestures in relation to his toga. 400, 402, 405. In art the toga is shown with the long end dipping between the feet, a deep curved fold in front, and a bulbous flap at the midsection. 402. The drapery became more intricate and structured over time, with the cloth forming a tight roll across the chest in later periods. 406. The toga praetexta, with a purple or purplish red stripe representing inviolability, was worn by children who had not come of age, curule magistrates, and state priests. Only the emperor could wear an all-purple toga, toga picta. 407. The basic garment for all Romans, regardless of gender or wealth, was the simple-sleeved tunic. The length differed by wearer. A man's reached mid-calf, but a soldier's was somewhat shorter, a woman's fell to her feet, and a child's to its knees. 408. The tunics of poor people and laboring slaves were made from coarse wool in natural, dull shades, with the length determined by the type of work they did. Finer tunics were made of lightweight wool or linen. A man who belonged to the senatorial or equestrian order wore a tunic with 2 purple stripes, clavi, woven vertically into the fabric. The wider the stripe, the higher the wearer's status. 408. Other garments could be layered over the tunic. In the 2nd century, emperors and men of status are often portrayed wearing pallium, an originally Greek mantle, emation, folded tightly around the body. Women are also portrayed in the pallium. Tertullian considered the pallium an appropriate garment both for Christians, in contrast to the toga, and for educated people, since it was associated with philosophers. 400, 402, 409. The 4th century, the toga had been more or less replaced by the pallium as a garment that embodied social unity. 410. Roman clothing styles changed over time, though not as rapidly as fashions today. 411. In the dominate, clothing worn by both soldiers and government bureaucrats became highly decorated, with woven or embroidered stripes, clavi, and circular roundels, orbiculi, applied to tunics and cloaks. These decorative elements consisted of geometrical patterns, stylized plant motifs, and in more elaborate examples, human or animal figures. 412. The use of silk increased, and courtiers of the later empire wore elaborate silk robes. The militarization of Roman society, and the waning of cultural life based on urban ideals, affected habits of dress. Heavy military-style belts were worn by bureaucrats as well as soldiers, and the toga was abandoned. 413. Arts. The wedding of Zephyrus and Chloris, 5468 AD, Pompeian fourth style, within painted architectural panels from the Casa del Naviglio. People visiting or living in Rome or the cities throughout the empire would have seen art in a range of styles and media on a daily basis. Public or official art including sculpture, monuments such as victory columns or triumphal arches, and the iconography in coins is often analyzed for its historical significance or as an expression of imperial ideology. 414. At imperial public baths, A person of humble means could view wall paintings, mosaic statues, and interior decoration often of high quality. 415. In the private sphere, objects made for religious